It was a cold evening in a small town where the lights flickered in narrow streets and people hurried home before the night deepened. Inside a cramped little apartment above a grocery store, a woman sat near the window, her hands trembling as she looked at the stack of unpaid bills spread across the table. Her face showed quiet exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting every single day just to survive. The ticking clock was the only sound until a faint melody floated through the room. Her young son was sitting at an old piano in the corner, pressing the keys carefully, as if afraid they might break. The piano wasn't much to look at. It was scratched, missing paint, and a few of the keys didn't work. It had been given to them by a kind neighbor years ago, and though it looked like junk, it was the boy's favorite thing in the world. Every evening, after finishing his homework and helping his mother wash dishes, he'd sit there and play. His mother turned from the bills and listened. The music was gentle and sad, like a whisper trying to speak. She closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, the noise of her worries disappeared. The boy noticed her tired eyes and smiled softly while continuing to play. He didn't know fancy songs, but he played with feeling, as if the piano could somehow comfort her better than words ever could. When the melody ended, she sighed, half smiling. "You make the house sound happy," she said quietly. He shrugged, brushing the dust off the piano. "I like it when you smile," he replied almost shyly. Then he added, "One day I'll buy you a new piano. One that doesn't squeak." She laughed, though her eyes grew wet. "Let's worry about paying the rent first," she whispered. Their landlord wasn't known for kindness. He was a man who loved money more than people. He owned half the buildings in the area, including the grocery store downstairs. Every month, when the rent was due, he would show up in his shiny car wearing expensive clothes, looking down on everyone who couldn't keep up with his demands. Lately, things had been harder. The woman's sewing jobs were slowing down, and the small payments she got barely covered food. She had borrowed money after her husband passed away, thinking she could repay it once work picked up, but that never happened. The debt grew, and so did the landlord's anger. He started dropping by more often, his voice growing sharper each time. That night, she looked at the bills again, her heart heavy. "We're 3 months behind," she murmured. The boy stopped cleaning the piano and came closer. "Will he make us leave?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she rubbed his head gently and forced a smile. "Don't worry about it. Just focus on your music." But he could see through her calmness. He was young, but not blind. Every sound outside made her tense. Every knock on the door made her heart race. A few days later, the knock came. It was loud, impatient, and cold. The woman quickly wiped her hands and opened the door. There he was, the landlord, holding a small notepad and a sneer. "You know why I'm here," he said, looking past her into the small room. His eyes fell on the piano and his mouth twisted into a mocking smile. "Still wasting time with that thing, huh?" She tried to stay polite. "Please, just give me a little more time." "I'm expecting some work next week," he shook his head. "You've been saying that for months. I can't keep waiting." His tone was loud enough that neighbors began peeking through their doors. The woman lowered her voice, embarrassed. "Please, not here. We'll find a way." The boy stood behind her, gripping the edge of the table. He wanted to say something, but his mother gave him a look that told him to stay quiet. The landlord sighed dramatically, pretending to think. "Tell you what," he said, finally smirking. "Maybe your little musician here can help you out." She frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" He chuckled, glancing at the piano. "If he can play something that makes me feel even a little less miserable, maybe I'll forget about the debt." Laughter echoed from some of the neighbors listening nearby. It was a cruel joke, one meant to humiliate, not help. The woman's face turned pale. "Please don't mock us," she said softly. But before she could stop him, her son stepped forward. His voice was calm but steady. "If I play something that touches your heart, will you forgive the debt?" The laughter stopped. The boy's words hung in the air, bold and unexpected. Even the landlord blinked, caught off guard. Then he smirked again. "You really think your little tunes can change anything? Fine. Play for me at my house this Saturday night. I'm throwing a small party. If you impress me, which I doubt, maybe we'll talk." He turned and walked away, leaving behind silence and disbelief. The woman knelt beside her son, holding his shoulders. "Why did you say that?" "You shouldn't have," she cried. The boy looked at her with calm eyes. "He was laughing at you, Mama. I can't let him do that. She shook her head. He'll only embarrass you in front of everyone. He doesn't care about your music, the boy smiled faintly. Maybe not, but I want to try. That night he sat by the piano again. The air in the room felt different, heavier. He pressed a few keys and winced when one of them stuck. He took a screwdriver from a drawer and carefully tried to fix it. His mother watched from the kitchen, worried and quiet. The next few days were filled with soft sounds of practice. Early in the morning before school and again at night before bed, he played quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. The melody he worked on wasn't from any book. It was one he had created himself. Something that reminded him of his father's laughter, his mother's patience, and the warmth that used to fill their home before everything fell apart. Sometimes, the mother would wake up in the middle of the night and see him still at the piano, his fingers moving slowly, his face focused. She'd want to tell him to sleep, but something stopped her. The music was tender, and in it she heard hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. People in the neighborhood started whispering. Did you hear? The boy is going to play for the landlord. That rich man is just making fun of them again. Poor kid. He doesn't know what he's walking into. But the boy didn't let the talk bother him. He had only one thought, to make his mother smile again. The night before the performance, the mother sat beside him, holding his hand. Promise me you won't be upset if he laughs at you, she said quietly. Music doesn't belong to people like him. He nodded. I know, but I'm not playing for him. Then for who? She asked softly. He looked up at her and said, and for you. And for Dad? Tears welled in her eyes. She hugged him tightly, and for a while neither of them spoke. The piano sat between them, its worn keys reflecting the dim glow of the lamp. Outside, the town was quiet. The grocery store below had closed for the night and the streets were empty. The only sound was the boy's gentle playing, a lullaby that drifted through the window into the night air. When morning came, he put on his cleanest clothes, though they were still faded and old. His mother brushed his hair carefully, her hands trembling. You look perfect, she said with a smile that didn't hide her worry. As they left the apartment, she looked back one last time at the small room that had been their world. She whispered a silent prayer. The boy carried no sheet music, no fancy instrument, just courage and a heart full of hope. He didn't know what would happen that evening. He didn't know if the landlord would laugh or listen, but somewhere deep down, he believed that music could reach even the hardest hearts. And as they walked toward the mansion at the end of the street, the old piano stood in the corner of their room, silent but proud, as if it too was waiting for the sound that might change everything. The morning of the performance came with a chill in the air. The sun was slow to rise and a light mist hung over the quiet streets. Inside the small apartment above the grocery shop, the woman paced the floor, her hands twisting together nervously. Every sound made her flinch. The creak of the stairs, the rumble of carts outside, even the clock ticking on the wall. She looked at her son, who sat by the piano playing softly with his eyes closed. He had been calm all morning. Too calm, she thought. Maybe he was hiding his fear. Maybe he didn't fully understand what he was walking into. The landlord's house was no simple place. It was a mansion, a place where important people gathered, dressed in their finest clothes, drinking and laughing like life was nothing but a party. Her boy didn't belong there, not because he wasn't worthy, but because the world rarely respected those who came from nothing. Are you sure about this? She asked again, her voice low. He nodded without opening his eyes. It's just a song, Mama. I'll play and then we'll come home. She sighed. I wish it was that simple. He smiled faintly. It will be. You'll see. The boy kept playing until the melody flowed smooth and warm. His fingers, though small, moved with purpose. The sound filled the room like sunlight through a dusty window. For a few moments, even his mother forgot her fear and simply listened. It was strange, how music could quiet a storm inside you, even when everything outside felt uncertain. When afternoon came, the boy stopped practicing and looked at his clothes. He wore the same outfit from the day before, clean but faded. His mother had ironed the shirt as best as she could. She wrapped a thin scarf around his neck to keep him warm. Don't worry about what they wear, she said softly. Just keep your head up. They left the apartment just as the sun began to set. The sky was painted with orange and gold, and the streets slowly came alive with evening chatter. Some neighbors watched them pass, whispering to one another. "There goes the little piano boy," one woman murmured. "They say he's going to play for the landlord himself." Another shook her head. "That man will never forgive the debt. He just wants to humiliate them." The boy heard the whispers, but he didn't let them sink in. He only looked ahead. His mother walked beside him, holding his hand tightly. It was a long walk to the other side of town, where the rich lived in tall houses with bright lights and big gates. When they reached the mansion, music and laughter spilled out from inside. Cars lined the driveway, and people in elegant clothes stood chatting near the door. The woman hesitated, pulling her son slightly back. "Maybe we should turn around," she whispered. "We don't belong here." But the boy looked up at her, his eyes steady. "You said once that music belongs to everyone." Her throat tightened. She nodded slowly, and together they walked up the steps. The landlord's house was even grander inside. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, and the floor gleamed like glass. A long table was filled with food that looked too perfect to touch. Guests were everywhere, laughing, talking, holding glasses of sparkling drinks. When the landlord noticed them at the door, his smile was wide and mocking. "Well, look who decided to come," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "Our little pianist and his mother." Some of the guests turned and chuckled, whispering among themselves. The boy felt their eyes on him, but he stood straight, his small hands clasped in front of him. The landlord motioned toward the center of the room where a polished piano stood. It was nothing like the one in their apartment. Its surface was smooth and shining, the keys bright and clean. The boy stared at it with quiet awe. "Here it is," the landlord said, smirking. "Let's see what magic this young man can create. If he plays something that truly moves me and something that makes me feel, then maybe, just maybe, I'll forget about their debt." Laughter followed his words. The mother lowered her gaze, her cheeks burning with shame. She wanted to grab her son's hand and leave, but he gently pulled away. The boy walked to the piano slowly, the sound of his small footsteps lost in the noise of the room. When he sat down, the room began to quiet. Some people watched out of curiosity, others with amusement. The landlord leaned against the wall, arms crossed, clearly expecting nothing. The boy took a deep breath. His fingers hovered above the keys. He looked around once, saw his mother standing at the edge of the crowd, clutching her hands together, and then he began to play. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. But soon the melody began to grow. It wasn't a song anyone recognized. It was something he had made himself. A piece stitched from memories and emotions that words could never capture. The sound was simple yet powerful, carrying pieces of love, loss, and hope all at once. At first the guests smiled politely, whispering to one another. But as the boy continued, something changed. His music seemed to fill the air differently. Not loud, but alive. Each note carried a story. It was as if the piano was speaking, telling them about sleepless nights, quiet prayers, and the strength of a heart that refused to give up. The landlord's smirk slowly faded. He watched, his expression unreadable. The music reminded him of something buried deep, something he hadn't thought about in years. He shifted uncomfortably, his hand gripping the edge of the table. When the boy reached the middle of the piece, his eyes closed completely. He wasn't looking at anyone anymore. He played as if he were back home, in their small room above the grocery store with his mother beside him. His fingers moved faster, pouring everything he felt into the piano. Every fear, every dream, every hope that tomorrow might be kinder. The room had fallen silent. The guests who had laughed earlier now stood frozen. Some looked away, blinking hard. The melody had wrapped around everyone like a gentle thread, pulling at their hearts in ways they couldn't explain. And then the final notes came, soft, trembling, fading into silence. For a moment, no one moved. The boy opened his eyes and looked at the piano, his chest rising and falling quickly. He didn't know if he had done enough. He didn't even know if he cared. He had played the truth, and that was all he could give. The landlord stared at him, his face pale and tense. The boy waited, afraid to look at his mother. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then someone in the crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then louder. Soon the whole room was applauding, but the boy didn't smile. He turned toward the landlord, who still hadn't moved. The man's eyes glistened as if he was fighting something inside him. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" The boy looked down. At home. On the old piano. The landlord nodded slowly, his voice quieter now. That song. What was it? It's something I made, the boy said softly. It's about how it feels to miss someone you love but still believe they're listening. The landlord blinked, his jaw tightening. He turned away for a second, then back again. You remind me of my son, he said under his breath, though only a few nearby could hear him. The boy didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. His mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes, and whispered, Thank you for letting him play. We'll go now. The landlord raised his hand. Wait. Everyone went silent again. The man looked at the boy for a long time, then said, Your debt is forgiven. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The mother's knees nearly gave out, and she caught herself on a chair. You don't mean that, she said, her voice trembling. I do, the landlord replied quietly. The boy earned it. He turned to the guests and added almost in a whisper, Sometimes music speaks louder than money. The boy stood still, not sure what to feel. Relief washed over his mother's face as tears rolled down her cheeks. The guests applauded again, but this time it wasn't out of politeness. It was real. As they left the mansion that night, the air outside felt lighter. The stars above shimmered faintly, and for the first time in months the woman smiled without fear. She looked down at her son and whispered, You did it. The boy shook his head. No, he said softly. The music did. And as they walked home, the sound of his song seemed to follow them through the quiet streets. A melody that had not only silenced laughter, but also melted a heart of stone. The days after the performance felt unreal. For the first time in a long while, the small apartment above the grocery shop was filled with quiet laughter. The air didn't feel so heavy anymore. The boy still woke up early as he always did, but this time his mother's eyes looked a little brighter. She no longer had to hide letters or stare at unpaid bills late at night. The landlord had kept his word. The debt was gone. It was strange how everything looked the same yet felt completely different. The cracked wall still needed paint and the piano still had its missing keys. But now every sound in that little room felt like hope instead of worry. When the boy played, his mother no longer looked anxious. She sat by the window sewing, smiling quietly as the soft music filled their home. Still deep inside, the boy couldn't stop thinking about that night. The silence after his last note. The landlord's face, though, the way it changed from mockery to something almost human. It was as if the music had unlocked a memory inside him. The boy didn't know exactly what it was, but he could feel that his song had reached him in a way words never could. One afternoon, while the boy was helping his mother hang laundry, a knock came at the door. It was soft this time. Nothing like the harsh pounding from before. When his mother opened it, she froze for a moment. Standing there was the landlord, but not in his usual expensive suit. He looked different, tired, maybe even humble. In his hands he carried a small wooden box. May I come in? He asked quietly. His mother hesitated, unsure what to say, but the boy nodded politely. The landlord stepped inside, glancing around the small room. It was the first time he had seen how they lived. The chipped walls, the single bed in the corner, the old piano near the window. His eyes lingered on the piano. So this is where you learned, he murmured. The boy nodded. Yes, sir. The landlord walked closer, running his fingers over the piano's surface. I had a piano once, he said softly. My son used to play it. He was about your age. His voice broke slightly at the end. The boy didn't know what to say, but something in the man's tone made his heart ache. The landlord placed the wooden box on the table and turned to the mother. I came to thank you, he said. Or rather, to thank your son. That night, his music reminded me of something I had forgotten. It reminded me of who I was before I let money change me. The woman lowered her gaze. You don't owe us anything, sir. You've already done more than enough. He shook his head. It's not about owing. It's about giving back. He opened the wooden box, and inside was a small golden emblem with the name of a nearby music academy engraved on it. They're looking for young talents. I made a few calls. If your boy wants, they'll let him audition next week. It's a scholarship program, and he won't have to pay a thing, the mother gasped. You mean he could study music there? The landlord nodded. If he plays the way he did that night, I have no doubt he'll get in. The boy stood frozen, his heart racing. He looked at his mother, who was already crying softly. Is this real? he whispered. She nodded, smiling through her tears. Yes, it's real. The landlord gave a small smile. Don't thank me yet. It's his talent that opened the door. All I did was knock. He turned to the boy. Remember, son, music is powerful. It can heal, forgive, and even remind people of who they used to be. Never stop playing. When he left, the small room fell silent again, but the silence was full of emotion. The boy sat down at the piano, his fingers trembling. A music academy, he whispered. He had never dreamed of such a thing. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lights of the mansion, the faces in the crowd, and the landlord's tearful eyes. The idea of standing in front of strangers again scared him, but at the same time it excited him. Maybe this was his chance to make something more of his gift, not just to play but to tell stories through sound. In the days that followed, he practiced more than ever. Morning till night he worked on new melodies. The neighbors downstairs began to notice the music drifting through the building. Some smiled and said, "The boy's going to be famous one day." Others shook their heads saying, "He's chasing dreams that belong to rich kids." But the boy didn't listen to either. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing purpose. His mother watched him closely. Sometimes she'd remind him to rest, sometimes she'd just sit quietly, letting the music speak for both of them. There was one moment when she whispered, "Your father would be proud if he could hear you." The boy stopped playing and smiled. "He does," he said softly. "I think he always listens." The week passed quickly and the day of the audition arrived. The music academy was bigger than anything they had ever seen. The walls were tall, the floors shining. Children from different parts of the city waited in line, dressed neatly, carrying folders of sheet music. The boy stood among them, wearing his same old clothes, holding nothing but a folded handkerchief from his mother. When his turn came, he walked into a large room where 3 judges sat behind a long table. A grand piano stood in the center, polished and perfect. His hands felt cold and his heart beat so fast he thought everyone could hear it. One of the judges, an elderly man with kind eyes, said, "Whenever you're ready." The boy took a deep breath and sat down. He didn't think about the crowd or the rich kids or the big hall. He closed his eyes and thought of home, of his mother by the window, of the broken piano that never failed him, of the music that carried their story. Then he began to play. The sound that filled the room wasn't flawless, but it was alive. It spoke of struggle and love, of small victories and quiet nights. The judges listened closely, exchanging glances. The melody wasn't technical. It was emotional. It came from the heart. When he finished, there was a long silence. The boy kept his eyes down, afraid to look at their faces. Then the elderly judge leaned forward. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked gently. The boy shook his head. "No one, sir. I just listened to what I felt." The judge smiled faintly. "That's rare. Most people play notes. You play stories." Tears filled the mother's eyes as she watched from the door. The boy bowed politely and stepped back. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was sealed with the academy's emblem. The boy tore it open with shaking hands. His mother read it out loud, her voice breaking with emotion. He had been accepted, full scholarship. They both laughed and cried at the same time. The boy hugged his mother tightly, whispering, "We did it." She smiled and said, "No, you did it." Word spread through the neighborhood quickly. Some people congratulated them warmly. Others muttered that it was just luck. But no one could deny that the boy's music had changed their lives. That evening, he sat at his old piano again. The keys were worn, the sound imperfect, but he loved it more than ever. He played the same melody that had once silenced a room full of laughter. Only this time it sounded different, lighter, freer, like a promise. Outside, the stars flickered softly as if listening. The grocery store owner downstairs turned off his lights, smiling as the music drifted down. Somewhere across town, the landlord sat alone in his mansion listening too. A small smile crossed his face. He had lost his son long ago, but that boy's music had brought him peace he hadn't felt in years. And in that little room above the grocery shop, the boy kept playing, not for fame, not for reward, but because his heart knew only one language, and that was music. His mother leaned against the wall, her eyes half closed, listening to the gentle rhythm that had carried them from despair to hope. She whispered softly, "Maybe this is what miracles sound like." The boy didn't answer. He just kept playing. as if the piano and his heart had become one. The night of the performance arrived faster than anyone expected. The boy had been preparing for days, practicing from dawn until his fingers ached. His mother kept reminding him to rest, but he never complained. Every note he played carried a piece of his dream, a dream bigger than himself, a dream that began in that small room above the grocery shop. The Music Academy had invited him to perform at their annual showcase, a night where students and guests filled the grand hall to celebrate young talent. The letter said he would be performing one piece of his choice in front of teachers, parents, and sponsors. It wasn't just a performance. It was his first real stage. That morning, his mother woke early to prepare his clothes. They weren't new, but she washed and ironed them carefully. She wanted him to look his best. She didn't have much money to buy anything fancy, but she stitched a small patch inside his shirt, a little heart made from one of his father's old handkerchiefs. When she handed him the shirt, she smiled softly. "This is your lucky charm," she whispered. He smiled back and hugged her tightly. "Then I won't be afraid." The hours passed slowly, each one filled with nervous excitement. By afternoon, he packed his small bag, a water bottle, a folded cloth, and a tiny picture of his father that he kept hidden inside his piano bench. His mother placed her hands on his shoulders and said, "No matter what happens tonight, remember why you play. Don't think about the crowd or the judges. Just play from your heart." He nodded quietly. When they reached the academy that evening, the building shimmered with lights. People dressed in elegant clothes walked up the marble stairs, talking and laughing. A tall banner at the entrance read, "The Symphony of Young Talents." The boy stared at it, his heart thumping with both pride and fear. He wasn't used to big places or important people. The hall smelled of flowers and polished wood. Inside, students sat in neat rows, some holding violins, others tuning guitars. Everyone looked confident. The boy sat at the back, holding nothing but his hands, the instruments of his gift. A kind teacher came up to him and smiled. "You're the young man the director's been talking about," she said gently. "Don't be nervous. Just do what you do best," he smiled shyly. "Thank you." The performance began with a choir, their voices rising like sunlight. Then came a violin solo, a flute duet, and a young girl playing a classical piece that made everyone applaud. The boy listened carefully, amazed by their talent. But instead of feeling small, he felt inspired. Each note reminded him why he loved music, because it spoke in ways words never could. When his name was finally announced, a hush spread through the hall. "Next, we have a new student whose story has already touched many hearts," the announcer said warmly. "Please welcome our youngest performer." The boy walked toward the stage, his heart pounding. The piano sat under a golden light, gleaming and tall. As he took his seat, he could feel hundreds of eyes on him. His mother sat near the back, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, whispering a silent prayer. He placed his fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. For a moment he thought of home, the smell of the grocery store below their apartment, the sound of his mother's voice, and the night when the landlord's laughter turned to silence. Then he began to play. The first note floated into the air, clear and gentle. The melody started slow, like the sound of a small river flowing through stones. It carried warmth, then sadness, then hope. The hall grew quiet. Even the faint rustle of papers stopped. The boy didn't read from sheet music. Everything came from memory. As he played, his emotions poured out. His father's absence, his mother's endless struggle, the kindness that had found them when they needed it most. The music rose and fell like a heartbeat. The audience could feel the truth in every note. It wasn't polished perfection. It was raw, honest, and beautiful. At one point, the boy closed his eyes completely. He forgot where he was. The lights, the crowd, the stage, all of it faded. In his mind, he was back home, sitting at his old piano, the broken keys still singing their story. He remembered how it all began, the mockery, the debt, the challenge. But what filled him now wasn't anger. It was gratitude, because even pain had led him here. When the final note came, he let it linger, soft, trembling, fading slowly into silence. For a few seconds, no one moved. The stillness was thick, filled with emotion that didn't need words. Then came the applause, loud, powerful, and endless. People stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. The boy looked up, his cheeks flushed, his heart racing. He saw his mother standing too, her eyes glistening with tears. The teacher from earlier wiped her eyes, smiling proudly. The head of the academy, an older man with silver hair, approached the stage. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said into the microphone, "Sometimes music doesn't need words to tell a story." Tonight, this young man reminded us why we listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. The applause grew even louder. The boy bowed deeply, unsure whether to smile or cry. After the show, people surrounded him, teachers, students, even sponsors who wanted to meet him. "You have a gift," one said. "That was incredible," another added. But the boy's eyes searched only for one face, his mother's. When he finally saw her, she pushed through the crowd and hugged him tightly. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The warmth between them said everything. Later that night, as the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, the head of the academy called them into his office. The room was filled with framed pictures and golden awards. He looked at the boy kindly. "You've done something rare," he said. "You made everyone in that room feel something real. That's what true music is." He handed the boy a small envelope. "This is your full acceptance letter. You'll begin classes next week. You'll have teachers, instruments, and everything you need. We'll even provide transportation." The mother covered her mouth, unable to speak. Tears streamed down her face. The boy bowed and whispered, "Thank you, sir." As they stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights sparkled like stars on the ground. The boy walked beside his mother in silence, his heart still full from the evening. "Did you hear them clap, Mama?" he asked softly. She smiled. "I heard your heart sing louder than anything else." He laughed quietly, then stopped to look at the sky. "I think Dad heard it too," she nodded. "I'm sure he did." When they reached home, the little apartment felt different again, brighter, warmer. The old piano waited in the corner as if it knew what had happened. The boy ran his fingers across the keys and smiled. "I'll never stop playing," he said. That night, he played one more song before bed, not for an audience, not for applause, but for himself. The melody was light and full of peace. His mother fell asleep listening to it, her face calm for the first time in years. Downstairs, the grocery store owner listened too, shaking his head in wonder. "That boy's going to change the world someday," he murmured. And across town in his grand mansion, the landlord sat by his window, listening to the echo of the same song that had once silenced his heart. He smiled softly and whispered, "Maybe I was the one who was taught that night." The stars above seemed to shimmer brighter, and the sound of the piano floated gently through the night air, a reminder that sometimes a single melody can carry the power to heal, forgive, and begin again. The morning after the performance, the city felt softer somehow. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of the small apartment, and for the first time in a long while, the boy woke up smiling. The echo of last night's applause still lingered in his ears. It wasn't the sound itself that filled him with joy. It was what it meant. People had finally heard him, not just as a poor boy from the old building, but as someone who had something to say through his music. He sat at the piano before breakfast, his fingers resting on the keys. He didn't play yet. He just sat there quietly, remembering every moment of the night before, the bright lights, the faces in the crowd, his mother's proud tears. He whispered softly to the instrument, "We did it." His mother stepped into the room with a tray of tea and bread. She looked tired, but her smile was brighter than ever. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" she asked gently. He grinned. "I didn't want to. I kept hearing the music in my head." She placed the tray beside him. "Then keep it there," she said softly. "It will guide you." They ate together in silence for a while. Then came a knock on the door. The mother looked surprised. They rarely had visitors. When she opened it, a tall man stood outside, holding a camera and a notepad. He introduced himself as a local reporter. "I was at the academy last night," he said with a kind smile. "The whole town's talking about your son. We'd love to write about him in the paper." The mother blinked in disbelief. "The paper?" "Yes," the man said. "His story. It's special. People need to hear it." The boy stood behind his mother, shyly holding the edge of her sleeve. He wasn't used to attention. The reporter asked if he could take a few pictures and ask some questions. They sat near the piano as he spoke softly, asking about how the boy had learned to play, about the challenges they had faced. The boy answered honestly. He talked about practicing on an old piano with broken keys, about how his mother worked long hours and how music helped him forget their worries. But when the reporter asked why he played the piano, the boy paused for a long moment. Then he said, "Because when I play, it feels like everything bad becomes good again." The reporter smiled. "That's the best answer I've heard in years." The next morning, their story appeared in the local newspaper with a picture of the boy sitting at his piano, his hands gently touching the keys. The headline read, "The Boy Who Played Away His Family's Debt." It was simple but powerful. Soon people began recognizing them. Customers at the grocery store would smile at the mother and say, "Your son's music gave me goosebumps." Neighbors who once looked down on them now nodded with respect. Even the landlord who had once mocked them sent a letter to their door. Inside was a single line, "I'm proud of you both." The mother read it silently, her hands trembling. "He's changed," she whispered. The boy only smiled. Maybe the music helped him too. A few days later, the academy invited them again, this time for something different. The director asked them to come to his office. When they arrived, the director was speaking with two men in suits. They stood as the boy entered. One of the men smiled warmly. "We represent a foundation that supports young musicians. We saw your performance and your story in the paper. We'd like to offer you a scholarship, full tuition, private lessons, and even a small allowance for your family." The boy's eyes widened. He didn't know what to say. His mother pressed a hand over her mouth, trying not to cry. The director nodded. "This isn't just a gift," he said. "It's an investment in your future. You've already proven what your heart can do." The boy finally spoke. "Thank you. I'll work harder than ever." The man smiled. "We know you will." That evening, as they walked home through the quiet streets, the mother kept looking at her son, as if trying to believe it was all real. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked softly. "You'll have everything you need to study. You can become whatever you dream of." He nodded slowly. "I just want to keep playing. That's all I need." Life began to change after that. The boy's days were filled with lessons, rehearsals, and hours of practice. He met new teachers who encouraged him, showing him new techniques and styles. He learned to read sheet music properly, to compose small melodies of his own, and to listen deeply, not just to the piano but to the world around him. He also began helping younger students at the academy. Sometimes he'd sit beside a little girl struggling with a piece and whisper, "Don't look at the notes, listen to them." His kindness made him well loved among his classmates. At home, the mother worked less and smiled more. She spent her evenings listening to him play, the soft notes filling their small room with warmth. The grocery store owner, who had watched them struggle for years, often closed his shop early just to listen through the ceiling. Months passed, and the boy's fame began to grow. People shared his story far beyond their town. One evening, they received a letter from a nearby city, an invitation to perform at a charity concert for children who had lost their parents. The boy agreed immediately. When the day came, the hall was filled with children sitting on the floor, their eyes wide and full of wonder. The boy sat at the piano and looked at them quietly before he began. This time he played a song he had written himself. It was a melody of comfort, gentle like a lullaby, but with a spark of hope running through it. As he played, some of the children smiled, others closed their eyes. A few even held hands. When he finished, they clapped softly, not like an audience, but like friends thanking him for sharing something pure. After the concert, one small boy came up to him and said, "When you played, I saw my mom smiling again." The words made him freeze. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He simply knelt down and hugged the child. That night, he told his mother what the boy had said. She listened quietly, her eyes glistening. "You see," she said softly, "your gift doesn't just change your life, it changes others too." He nodded. "Then I'll keep playing, for everyone who needs to hear it." As the months rolled on, he began performing in more places, small theaters, schools, even hospitals. Each time he carried the same humble heart. He never forgot where he came from, never forgot the broken piano that started it all. One afternoon, the academy director called him into his office again. "You've come a long way," he said. "There's something else you should know. A group of musicians from another country saw your video online. They want you to join their youth program abroad." The boy's mouth fell open. "Abroad?" "Yes," the director said with a smile. "It's a big opportunity. You'll learn from great pianists, travel, and share your music with the world. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Can my mother come with me?" The director smiled. "Of course. We'll make sure of it." That night he told his mother everything. She sat down slowly, her face pale with shock. "Leaving this place?" she whispered. "It's hard to imagine." He took her hand. "We'll go together. You've always said dreams don't stay small forever." She looked at him and nodded, tears in her eyes. "Then we'll go where the music takes us." Before they left, the boy visited the grocery shop one last time. The old owner hugged him and said, "Play your heart out, boy. And don't forget this place." "I never will," the boy promised. The night before their flight, he sat at the piano once more. The same piano that had carried every note of his journey. He played softly, his fingers moving with calm confidence. His mother stood by the window, listening as she packed their bags. When he finished, she said quietly, "That song. What do you call it?" He smiled. "It's called Home." She nodded, whispering, "Then we'll carry it with us." As dawn broke, they stepped out of the apartment with their small suitcases. The boy looked back one last time at the building, the window where the light had always glowed when he practiced. Then he turned forward, ready for whatever came next. The sky was wide and full of promise. The music that had once lived in a small room was now ready to travel across the world. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew that no matter how far he went, every song he played would always carry the same heartbeat. His mother's strength, his father's memory, and the simple truth that love can turn even the hardest moments into something beautiful. The airplane window showed a blanket of clouds beneath them, soft and endless. The boy pressed his forehead against the glass, staring out with wide eyes. He had never flown before. Every vibration, every hum of the engines made his heart beat faster, not with fear, but with excitement. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand. She kept looking at him quietly, her heart full of wonder. Just a year ago, they had been worrying about rent and debt, and now they were flying to another country because of his music. Life had turned in a way neither of them could have imagined. When the plane landed, they stepped into a new world. Tall buildings, wide streets, and a language they barely understood. But smiles spoke louder than words. Representatives from the music program greeted them warmly, holding a sign with his name written in big letters. The mother bowed shyly and the boy waved, his small bag slung over his shoulder. Their new home was a small apartment near the academy. It wasn't big, but it was bright and full of light. The academy itself looked like something from a dream. Glass walls, polished floors, and rows of pianos that gleamed under the lights. For the boy, it felt like stepping into another universe. The teachers welcomed him like family. His new mentor, an elderly pianist with soft eyes, watched him play during his first lesson. When the last note faded, the teacher remained silent for a moment, then said softly, "You play like you've lived many lives already." The boy smiled shyly. "I just play what I feel." "Then never lose that," the teacher said. "Technique can be taught, but feeling, that's something you're born with." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The boy learned new ways to express himself through music. Classical pieces, improvisations, even his own compositions. Sometimes after class, he would stay behind in the empty hall, playing to himself long after the lights dimmed. His mother often came to pick him up, standing quietly at the door, watching him with tears in her eyes. He didn't just play for himself anymore. He played for everyone who had believed in him, and for those who had once laughed. One afternoon, after a long practice, his teacher told him that the academy would be hosting an international charity concert. "The proceeds will go to families in need," the teacher explained. "We'd like you to perform the closing piece." The boy froze. "Me?" The teacher nodded. "Yes, you represent what this concert is all about, hope." The news spread quickly. It would be his biggest performance yet, broadcast live and attended by musicians from around the world. The boy practiced every day, not out of pressure, but because he wanted his music to mean something deeper. His mother helped him prepare, ironing his clothes, packing small snacks, and keeping his spirits calm when nerves crept in. She never stopped reminding him why he started, not for fame or applause, but for love. The night of the concert arrived. The hall was enormous, filled with people dressed in shining clothes and cameras flashing from every corner. The boy stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly. His teacher placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Don't think about the crowd. Think about your story. He nodded. When it was finally his turn, the stage lights glowed softly as he walked out. The piano stood at the center, shining under a golden spotlight. The crowd quieted. He sat down, took a slow breath, and closed his eyes. He began with a soft note, then another. The melody was new, but it carried all the moments that had shaped him. The sound of the broken piano in his old home, his mother's laughter when things were hard, the kindness of strangers, the letter of forgiveness from the landlord, and the applause that had changed his life. Each note told a memory. The music rose and fell like waves filled with honesty and heart. It wasn't loud or perfect. It was real. People leaned forward, listening closely, as if afraid to miss even 1 second. Some closed their eyes. Others wiped tears quietly. Halfway through, the boy's mother watched from the audience, her hands pressed to her chest. In that moment, she didn't see the child who had once been mocked. She saw the man he was becoming. Strong yet gentle, carrying every hardship and turning it into something beautiful. When the last note faded, silence filled the hall again. Then came the applause, long, thunderous, unstoppable. People rose to their feet, clapping with everything they had. The host stepped onto the stage and announced, "Tonight, through music, we have raised enough to help more than 50 families pay their debts and rebuild their lives." The crowd cheered louder, and the boy sat there stunned. He hadn't just played a song, he had played something that truly changed lives. After the concert, a wealthy patron approached him. "Your music reminded me of my childhood," he said kindly. "I want to donate to your family's community. Perhaps fix that old building where you lived." The boy's eyes widened. "Really?" "Yes," the man said. "You inspired me. That's what true art does." The boy bowed deeply. "Thank you, sir." A week later, news arrived that the old apartment building back home had been repaired. The grocery store owner sent them a letter filled with joy. "Everyone's talking about you. The street feels alive again," he wrote. Even the landlord had started supporting other young musicians, sponsoring a small music room for kids who couldn't afford lessons. When the mother read the letter, she began to cry softly. "Do you see, my son? Your music didn't just pay our debt. It healed everything that was broken." The boy smiled, wiping her tears. "Then it's not my music anymore. It's everyone's." Months passed, and his name began to appear in magazines and music journals. But he never changed. He still practiced in silence, still wrote songs inspired by simple things, laughter, rain, love. He often told people, "I don't play for perfection. I play for peace." One quiet evening, after a long rehearsal, he and his mother took a walk near the harbor. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. Boats swayed gently in the distance, and street musicians played soft tunes nearby. His mother looked at him and said, "You know, there was a time when I used to worry about tomorrow. But now, every time I hear you play, I feel like tomorrow is already here, and it's kind." He smiled. "Then I'll keep playing for tomorrow." When they returned home, he sat down at his piano, the same one he had brought with him from the academy. He opened a small notebook and began writing a new piece. The title was simple, "The Debt That Vanished." It wasn't about money or bills. It was about gratitude, the kind that grows when kindness meets hardship. Years later, when people spoke about him, they didn't just call him a musician. They called him the boy who healed hearts through his piano. He performed in cities around the world, yet he always returned home once a year, to play for free at the same grocery store where his journey began. The old owner would smile, sit on a chair outside, and listen like it was the first time. One summer evening, as he played under the open sky, a little girl approached him shyly and asked, "Can I learn to play like you one day?" He smiled, motioned her closer, and said, "Of course you can. The piano doesn't care who you are. It only listens to your heart." She sat beside him, pressing a single key, giggling as the sound echoed. He guided her hand gently and said, "That's how it starts, one note at a time." His mother watched from a few steps away, her eyes shining with quiet pride. She didn't need words to say what she felt. It was already there in the music that drifted through the warm evening air. As the sun set and the crowd clapped softly, the boy looked up at the sky. He thought about his father, about the laughter that had once hurt, the tears that had once burned, and the hope that had never left. He whispered to himself, "We did it." The sound of the piano carried far across the streets, gentle, steady, full of love. It told a story that would live long after the notes faded, a story of a boy who played not for fame or money, but for forgiveness, kindness, and the beautiful truth that when music comes from the heart, it can make every debt disappear.